Pokemon Scarlet and Violet have been out for just under a week, and they've already become some of the most divisive games in the franchise. But what is it about these two games that's causing such a problem, and why can't fans decide whether they love them or hate them? Well, after spending the last few days of my life completing Pokemon Violet, I decided to take a spoiler-free look into these games to try and piece it all together. Also, before this review starts, please feel free to subscribe. It only takes a few seconds and it really helps the channel out. So, to set the scene for anyone that's been living under a rock the last few days, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet were released as incomplete and glitchy as Sonic 06. By now, you've probably seen countless amounts of memes about how buggy and poorly optimized these games are, and anyone that's already played them knows exactly what I'm on about, so I won't spend too long on this point. But I think it goes without saying that it's nearly impossible to bring up these two games without mentioning their current state. Sure, the games aren't unplayable because of these issues, and if anything, a lot of the bugs and glitches have only added to their charm, which, funnily enough, ended up being the case with Pokemon Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl, and was probably one of the only reasons that people enjoyed that game. But why is it that modern Pokemon games seem to be launching as betas instead of the AAA games that they could be? I think it's fairly obvious to any Pokemon fan that Game Freak doesn't seem to be getting the love and support they need from the higher ups in Nintendo and the Pokemon Company. And as someone who's been a Pokemon fanatic since Generation 3, it's just sad to see the current state of the franchise. First party Nintendo games have always had a certain level of polish to them. Heck, they even invented the Nintendo seal of quality to show us that their products were the real deal. So what exactly is going on right now with the Pokemon franchise? And how can Nintendo and the Pokemon Company sit back and let their games be released to us in this state? I feel like a lot of the love that all three of these companies once had for the franchise is slowly starting to fade away, and it seems like Pokemon is now being treated as a steady cash cow, with new games being pumped out yearly with little to no cohesion between them, and the overall quality of each release being questionable at best. But to no one's surprise, most people seem to be enjoying Scarlet and Violet despite these glaringly obvious issues. But why is that? Well, it turns out that despite their flaws, these new Pokemon games are surprisingly fun. I think from here on out, my opinions on these games are going to be pretty subjective and might differ slightly from your own. So if I do say anything that offends you, please feel free to comment your own opinions down below. Anyways, believe it or not, I actually enjoyed playing through Pokemon Violet, but does this mean it's a perfect game? No. But I think by now most fans have probably given up on the idea that we'll ever get a perfect Pokemon game. Scarlet and Violet are probably the most fun Pokemon games we've gotten in the 3D era, and between them and Legends Arceus, it's starting to look like Game Freak might finally have their shit together. These games are leaps and bounds ahead of Sword and Shield when it comes to storyline and writing, and all three of the paths the player can take to progress the story are fully fleshed out, and show a lot of great character moments, which to me definitely made the story focused sections of these games more enjoyable. A lot of the side characters we meet on our journey are extremely well written and have a lot of charm to them, outside of just their designs. It's been a while since a Pokemon game has given us a good set of friends and rivals, and I think Arven, Penny and Nemona are all perfectly integrated into the story, and the way in which all three of their plot lines come together towards the end is perfect. For anyone still playing through the storylines, I'll avoid spoiling it, but let's just say the final sections of these games is up there with Legends Arceus and Black and White. It's also very clear that a lot of inspiration for the final sections of these games was taken from Legends, and it seems like Toby Fox might have had a hand in writing the final few scenes, as if it wasn't already painfully obvious that everything he touches turns to gold. Speaking of Toby Fox though, I feel like the soundtrack for these games is a bit hit or miss. A lot of the tracks that sound like his work are perfect, don't get me wrong, and the final boss battle theme sounds like it's straight out of Undertale. But for me, the majority of the soundtrack fell flat, especially the Elite Four and the Gym Leader battle theme, which also feels like it's trying too hard to recapture the magic of the Sword and Shield one. Overall, I feel like Scarlet and Violet's soundtrack is a step down from previous games, but it does have a handful of good tracks that I'll be definitely adding to my gaming music playlist. Another thing that I felt previous games done better was Pokemon design, which I've already spoken about in length in my problem with modern Pokemon design video, so if you want my full in-depth opinion, make sure to check that out. But in short, I dislike the majority of new Pokemon added to this game. Sure, a lot of them will be strong competitively, but as a casual player that doesn't matter to me. Also, a lot of the new evolution lines feel very uninspired, and the overall creativity just doesn't seem to be there anymore. I mean, Paldea is based off of Spain, and it feels like there was very little inspiration drawn from the actual country when it came to designing these new Pokemon. I also think it's important to mention some of the gameplay features that were either added or removed from these games. Firstly, it's painfully obvious that one-off TMs were brought back to artificially increase playtime and grinding, and it's ridiculous that a quality of life improvement from 12 years ago was suddenly dropped in order to make Scarlet and Violet feel like they had some side quest content in them. Sure, you can AFK auto battle wild Pokemon and farm up TMs, but what exactly is the point in this if the TM system was perfected over a decade ago? If Game Freak really wanted to give us some beneficial extra content to grind through, why not bring back the Battle Frontier or even the Pokedex research tasks that everyone loved from Legends Arceus? It's also criminal that Legends Arceus' catching system didn't make its way into these games. I think everyone can agree that the variety of different ways to catch Pokemon in Legends was perfect, and having to go back to the old style of battling Pokemon one by one in order to catch them now feels so unnatural and backwards. Thankfully though, some quality of life improvements from the newer Pokemon games did make their way into Scarlet and Violet, such as being able to access your PC storage anywhere on the map, and being able to relearn moves and nickname Pokemon on the fly. But in true Game Freak fashion, for every quality of life mechanic they kept, we lost series staples like set mode and turning battle animations off. Also, why the fuck do Pokemon not close their eyes while they're sleeping? Speaking of modern Pokemon games, as much as Scarlet and Violet want you to think that they're open world and that your exploration and discovery will be rewarded, this sadly isn't the case. A lot of the game's content is locked behind beating gyms, titans and Team Star, and because none of these three separate storylines scale with your current level or badges, the game ends up rewarding linear playthroughs more than it should. I just don't see why Game Freak didn't make the entire region scale and difficulty around the player. Maybe it was time constraints or laziness on their end. But with the main message of Gen 9 being exploration and treasure hunting, it definitely feels like a missed opportunity to show off a completely open world Pokemon game. The overall design of the Paldea region also contradicts the exploration motif that these games are going for. Most of the towns you visit throughout the game are quite forgettable and lack any of the traditional landmarks we're used to seeing. There's no longer any skyscrapers or special buildings for us to enter. In fact, from what I've seen, there's very few buildings or houses for us to explore at all. And this ends up leaving the Paldea region feeling very empty and soulless. It also seems like Game Freak has given up on interior design completely, considering gyms are no longer dungeon-like areas with a specific design scheme relating to the gym leader's typing. And the Elite Four no longer have designated rooms for each member. Instead, all of their battles now take place in what looks like Paldea's mental asylum. You'd think with the clear lack of resources being put into these towns and buildings, that Game Freak might have shifted their focus onto the route design instead. It is an open world Pokemon game at the end of the day, right? Well no, as much as I love having the whole map of Paldea being interconnected, it still leaves most of the routes feeling bland and barren. This, on top of the fact that you no longer have to battle trainers or follow a strict path from town to town, really makes the Paldea region feel like it's missing a distinct aesthetic. I mean, I'm probably the only one who cares about this stuff, but I just miss how Pokemon regions used to have a coherent theme to them, like how Hoenn felt lush and tropical, and Sinnoh felt mountainous and dangerous. And by now, you're probably asking yourself, didn't he say he found these games fun, but all he's done is complain? And that question right there sums up what it means to be a modern Pokemon fan. Yes, these games lack polish, key gameplay features, and even some soul, but fuck me are they some of the most enjoyable Pokemon games I've ever played. Despite all their issues, Pokemon Scarlet and Violet are still enjoyable, and the final boss battle of these games is something every Pokemon fan needs to experience for themselves. Pokemon has stood the test of time for a reason, and it's still just as captivating as it was 25 years ago. There's just something special about this franchise that keeps us coming back for more. Maybe it's nostalgia, or maybe Pokemon truly is a 1 in a million franchise.